you start to get that self-important feeling that what you say has great import. And you know, strangely enough, you could use that show as a forum. You could sway people, and I don't think you should as an entertainer.
Johnny Carson was America's king of late night, commanding the attention of millions for 3 decades. Yet after his final show in 1992, he seemingly vanished. No interviews, no public appearances, just quiet isolation in his Malibu home. What drove the most famous man on television into near-total solitude as he faced his final years? Behind the charm and wit lay a complex man wrestling with lifelong fears, painful losses, and worsening health. His retreat was more than just privacy. It was a reflection of deep scars few ever saw. The public persona versus private man. Johnny Carson was the face of late-night television for 30 years, a master of charm, wit, and effortless humor who made millions laugh every night. To most, he was the ultimate extrovert, relaxed on stage, quick with a joke, and seemingly comfortable in the spotlight. But behind the camera, Johnny was profoundly different. His producer, Peter LaSalle, noticed early on that Johnny wore a mask of charisma. The moment's cameras stopped rolling revealed a man eager to escape social interaction, drained by the very spotlight he commanded. Small talk drained Johnny, and he often avoided casual conversation with crew or colleagues whenever possible. His preference was solitude, sometimes absorbed in crossword puzzles rather than indulging in needless chatter. Even interactions with fans were minimal and carefully controlled. Johnny's desire to avoid people extended to the point where he ordered NBC to arrange a private exit for him after tapings, avoiding the crowds that so often filled the studio. For such a public figure, this retreat was striking and mysterious. Industry events were another burden Johnny approached with reluctance. While his peers regularly attended numerous Hollywood parties and public gatherings, Johnny limited himself to roughly a dozen per year. He joked that parties were for extroverts and that he preferred the company of his dog to attending social functions with his wife. This solitude wasn't merely a preference. It seemed a shield, a way to protect himself from the unpredictable world beyond his carefully managed public persona. This social distance created speculation about his personal relationships. Johnny married 4 times, a fact often linked to the emotional needs he failed to meet or perhaps even recognize in his spouses. Was his avoidance a root cause of those failed connections or a symptom of deeper struggles? His actions painted a picture of a man struggling not only with public life, but also with intimacy and vulnerability behind closed doors. Even when friends or colleagues visited, Johnny's interactions were brief and controlled. Director Howard Smith recalled small talk before Johnny would ask guests to observe the stars in silence, content yet distant. Was this serenity genuine peace, or a carefully constructed refuge? Johnny's quiet evenings at home, often spent in solitude rather than conversation, raised questions about the true nature of the man who had entertained so many. His wife, Alexis Maas, described their dinners as silent, marked by absence rather than engagement unless family was present. The man who so deftly navigated nightly conversations hesitated over the simplest of social exchanges. Some wondered if this was selfishness, others a deep-seated difficulty connecting. Whatever the cause, Johnny's private life was marked by withdrawal, revealing a stark contrast to his public warmth. Though aloof personally, Johnny was surprisingly generous behind the scenes. Without fanfare, he quietly donated millions to charity, often to strangers. Such acts hinted at a complicated heart, one capable of generosity but reluctant to connect openly. This duality of warmth and withdrawal shaped how those closest to him perceived Johnny, a paradox of distance and giving. His retreat into isolation invites a compelling question. What lies behind this profoundly private man cloaked in public charm? The answer begins in childhood, where the foundations for Johnny's complex personality were laid with lasting impact. The traumas and expectations of his early years would go on to shape not only his relationships, but also the very nature of his public success. Childhood trauma and perfectionism. Johnny Carson's childhood was far from that easy, carefree innocence people often link with Midwestern America. While other kids played baseball or just wandered through the Iowa countryside, Johnny kind of wanted to be alone. He'd be deep in comics or messing with card tricks. From a magic kit he had really desperately wanted. By 14, contact with other people felt like a kind of dread he couldn't shake. So when visitors came, he would hide behind the family's upright piano. And no, it wasn't just shyness. It was more like a heavy anxiety that grew out of harsh expectations at home. His mother, Ruth, set an impossible standard of perfection for Johnny and his siblings. Still, somehow, she also seemed to doubt Johnny could ever meet even the smallest expectations. Ruth's ruthlessness was, well known inside the family. She was more like a strict captain driving a warship than a nurturing parent. Affection in their house was like a rare currency, counted carefully, rationed out, and somehow only earned through flawless behavior. Compliments and warmth were scarcely offered, or maybe never offered at all. So Johnny grew up with this feeling that he was never quite good enough. Not even close. That kind of atmosphere can leave deep psychological scars. Johnny's mother reportedly ridiculed him even after he became a television star, refusing to fully admit his success, like it didn't count. That coldness left him tangled up with approval and love. It pushed him to look for acceptance beyond the family walls. But the warmth he kept hoping for was brief. A mirage he chased again and again, always struggling to keep it. Even with all that emotional trouble, Ruth apparently did support Johnny's early interest in entertainment. She even helped him, in a sense, by making him a kind of stand-in for his first magic show at the local Kiwanis Club. It was there, performing under the name The Great Carson, that Johnny first felt warmth that wasn't just pressure wearing a smile. Audience laughter and applause. That was different. And it kind of set the rhythm for Johnny's lifelong need to be seen through performance, over and over. Tragically, when Ruth died in 1985, Johnny's reaction was kinda complicated, and not really one thing only. People say he wouldn't show up to her funeral, and he told friends, "The Wicked Witch is dead." Afterwards, though, back at her home, he found this hidden treasure, a big box stuffed with clippings that basically praised and celebrated his career. It felt like a quiet, secret testament from a mother who had always been his biggest fan, even if everything between them was messy. So then his feelings got even more tangled. Like, did he actually regret not being there for her final goodbye? And could forgiveness, if it was ever possible, have arrived too late? Growing up with those kind of unpredictable emotional weather systems sort of trained Johnny into not trusting folks, and he ended up leaning toward isolation more than company. He learned early that talking to people might turn into criticism or worse, punishment. So as an adult, it made sense that he often picked solitude over socializing, trying to protect himself from fresh wounds he expected to happen anyway. His early wish to be a magician wasn't just a hobby, it was more like a longing for control and an easy escape from the moment. Reports differ on whether his mother first encouraged or quietly discouraged his ambitions, which only adds more layers to that complicated relationship. Still, his talent was obvious, and the time he spent in the Navy helped lock in the direction he was going. While serving in the Navy, Johnny leaned into physical and mental strength by boxing as an amateur, and he won 15 out of 16 bouts. Even then, he turned down an offer to stay in the Navy, and instead he announced he was set on becoming an entertainer, not a magician anymore, but a comedy writer. That decision, which sounds simple on paper, became a real turning point. It pulled him farther away from his childhood struggles and out into the public eye. The kid who used to hide from visitors started laying down a path toward becoming America's most beloved entertainer. Yet somehow the shadows from his upbringing never fully, ever lifted. From childhood insecurities to the complex dance of fame, Carson's journey was marked by contradictions that only grew clearer as his career soared. The rise to stardom and mask of charm. Johnny Carson's path to television stardom wasn't straightforward, but it was fueled by determination and an intrinsic understanding of performance. After college, where he switched his major from journalism to speech and drama, Johnny began gaining experience as a radio performer and magician, earning about $25 per show. Though he didn't become a magician, these early ventures prepared him well for the spotlight he was destined to command. His opportunity came in 1962 when he landed the hosting gig on NBC's The Tonight Show. Over the next 30 years, Johnny's effortless charm and sharp wit captivated audiences nationwide. He became a nightly ritual for millions, wielding humor as a way to connect, entertain, and escape his own vulnerabilities. Yet, much like a skilled actor on stage, the persona he presented was carefully constructed, an affable, quick-witted host masking a man who preferred emotional distance. The show's format itself was crucial to Johnny's approach. Late-night television allowed him the illusion of interaction, engaging with guests and audiences in a controlled environment where outcomes were predictable and scripted. This structure offered a sense of safety within performance, turning the talk show into a therapeutic space that shielded him from the emotional risks of genuine intimacy. Despite the warmth broadcasted to millions, Johnny struggled to sustain close relationships off-screen. He reportedly treated his 3 sons from his first marriage with cool detachment, mirroring his own experience with his mother. This emotional distance created growing gaps in his family life, even as his fame expanded. Behind the laughter was a man wrestling with the challenge of connecting beyond the stage. Johnny's public success was also a burden. The pressure of maintaining his image sometimes clashed with his deep desire for privacy and quiet. As his fame grew, the controlled environment of The Tonight Show began to feel less like therapy and more like a trap. The game of public performance eventually cost him dearly, especially when fans' demands cut into the privacy he so desperately craved. This dichotomy between public and private selves set the tone for much of Johnny's life. While he thrived on the applause and adoration, he simultaneously longed to disappear from the spotlight. He didn't mind the cameras, but despised the intrusion of fans into his personal space. This tension shaped many of his decisions later in life, including his retreat from the public eye. Behind the scenes, Johnny's quick wit masked profound loneliness. The control he exercised on stage was a sharp contrast to the unpredictability of his personal emotions. Despite immense talent and success, he remained vulnerable to the scars left by his upbringing. His rise to stardom was as much about survival as it was about fame. The mask of charm he wore for decades concealed a man who wrestled with fear, loss, and isolation. As Johnny evolved on screen, the cracks behind the mask began to reveal themselves, paving the way for his eventual withdrawal from the world that adored him. Strained marriages and family distance. Johnny Carson's public success seemed almost annoyingly sharp next to the messy kind of chaos that followed him in private, especially around his relationships. Through his life, he married 4 times, and somehow each marriage hit rough water. A lot of it tied back to how emotionally distant he could be, plus that workaholic pull that never really let go. His first marriage to Joan Woolcott ran for 14 years, and they had 3 sons. Still, even with the family bond there, Johnny later admitted he cheated and got stuck, like really stuck, on his career. That obsession, and the rest of it, helped set the stage for the divorce. After that, the separation didn't only end things with his wife, it also left this larger and larger gap between Johnny and his kids. His emotional distance felt almost familiar, like the same sort of coldness he said he knew from his own mother. And he ended up treating his sons with a similar kind of indifference. He tried, now and then, to close the distance, but it looked like those efforts were narrow, not enough. The whole fractured family situation stayed there quietly in the background, and it was painful, even if he never fully said it out loud. His second marriage to Joanne Copeland, this striking model also sort of caved under the weight of Johnny's emotional unavailability and the whole work schedule commitment thing. Their 9-year marriage did end in public accusations of neglect, and it cost Johnny about $500,000 in the divorce settlement. Yet, more than the actual money, it was the emotional toll that really stayed, like it pressed down, showing the personal price of Johnny's isolation. Johnny's third marriage to Joanna Holland lasted 13 years, but it was always getting tangled up in conflict between her social lifestyle and his preference for privacy. They fought hard, and over a $20 million settlement, almost bankrupting him, emotionally and financially. That public legal mess basically made the instability impossible to ignore, even when his fame was at its peak. It still followed him, like it was in the private room with him. In 1987, Johnny married Alexis Maas, who was fiercely protective of her privacy and also 26 years his junior. The marriage felt quieter, but it wasn't really less distant. Johnny's habit of reading, playing tennis by himself, or retreating to watch the ocean, rather than actually engaging deeply with his wife, made it seem like his withdrawal tendencies just grew stronger as he aged. So even if things were calmer, the relationship stayed marked by his inward focus, not shared intimacy, not really. The death of 2 of Johnny's sons really further fractured his family ties, and at the same time intensified his withdrawal. Like day by day, it got harder. In 1991, Rick Carson's tragic death in one single vehicle accident devastated Johnny, who carried around the burden of guilt for their estrangement as if it was something he could never set down. Then, just 4 years later, Christopher, his eldest son, died from lung cancer, a disease that was linked to heavy smoking, much like Johnny's own troubles, and that only made everything feel more tangled. All these losses piled up and compounded Johnny's sense of being alone, and they kept bringing new questions about what his detachment had cost, for real. Through all these personal challenges, Johnny's ability to show affection looked kind of limited, at least on the outside. He seemed like a man stuck between wanting connection and putting up a protective barrier, built from childhood wounds and professional demands. His relationships basically showed that same tension, like he was a person who, despite immense public warmth, still struggled with the intimacy that might have actually healed his loneliness. It was there, but it was locked away, almost by habit. Financially, these divorces and settlements drained Johnny, costing him more than $20 million, but the emotional cost might have been even deeper. Those broken ties became part of the blueprint for his final, solitary years that looked more like protective silence than public openness. In the end, Johnny's life shows how profound personal gaps can live behind even the brightest public masks. A reminder that fame doesn't automatically bring connection, no matter how it looks from far away. Somewhere between the fractured relationships and these personal tragedies, Johnny found a space where his true refuge lay, a place that became the core of his withdrawal from the world. The Tonight Show as safe space. The Tonight Show was more than a career for Johnny Carson. It became his sanctuary, a controlled environment where he could engage with people on his own terms. Each night behind the desk, Johnny projected effortless charm, but this was a crafted performance within a predictable setting that offered him security. The scripted interviews, rehearsed monologues, and familiar routines created an illusion of interaction that protected him from the unpredictability of real social connection. This carefully controlled public stage gave Johnny a therapeutic outlet. It allowed him to face audiences, share jokes, and feel a sense of belonging without risking the vulnerability that true intimacy requires. It was a paradox. He craved human connection, but feared the emotional messiness that came with it. The show offered the perfect balance, interaction without exposure. Off-camera, however, Johnny's desire for interaction evaporated. The very environment that brought him so much success became a cage, as fans and media often intruded into his personal space. He didn't mind the cameras, but desperately feared the loss of privacy. As his fame grew, the demands of the public increasingly conflicted with his need for quiet and solitude. This tension contributed to his decision to retire in 1992, a surprise to many who felt Johnny still had much to offer. But behind that decision was a man exhausted by the constant demands of public life and consumed by the fear of losing control in an environment that had once given him comfort. Retirement was a way to reclaim peace before his health and spirit could no longer sustain the performance. Johnny's emotional armor, honed through decades on television, made genuine connection difficult even with those closest to him. The show was a distance-preserving mask that kept others at bay. This detachment extended to his family, his friends, and even to his own wife, leaving him isolated even in personal relationships. On his show, Johnny could dictate the pace and tone, scripting outcomes and managing interactions. Off-screen, life was unpredictable and often uncomfortable. The show's format, while seemingly simple entertainment, was a complex coping mechanism, allowing Johnny to eat his cake and have it too by being with people without truly being with them. Despite the success and adoration, the controlled environment could not fully shield Johnny from the pain beneath. With increasing public scrutiny and loss of private space, The Tonight Show no longer offered the refuge it once did. His withdrawal became less about choice and more about necessity. In many ways, the show was both a gift and a prison, a space where Johnny could survive but not fully live. The cracks in his public persona deepened as his need for privacy overwhelmed his capacity to keep the mask intact. The demands of fame and the need for solitude collided, shaping the final chapters of Johnny Carson's life in ways few could have predicted. Behind the glow of television lights and laughter lay the complex interplay of personal loss and public necessity that led Johnny toward deeper isolation each day. The decline of health and smoking addiction. Johnny Carson's whole public image of sheer vitality kind of held things together, while privately he was dealing with a tough decline in his health, much of it fed by a decades-long smoking habit. Through the 1960s and really past the peak of his fame, Johnny stayed a chain smoker, lighting cigarettes up during high-pressure tapings, and even while the cameras were rolling. On live television, back when that sort of thing was still broadly tolerated, NBC archives indicate that he smoked somewhere between 40 and 60 cigarettes a day, almost 3 packs while he was working, an addiction that his huge audience never saw. Even with doctor warnings about a stubborn, chesty cough, Johnny couldn't, or simply wouldn't, stop. The habit pulled him under, and at least privately he told people he cared about that the cigarettes were essentially slaying him. Still, a mix of shame and denial kept him from getting real help, and he kept smoking as his lungs started to fail. That gap between the smooth, confident face he showed and the quiet deterioration he was suffering kept widening every time he tried to inhale. By the late 1970s, Johnny sort of admitted to himself that he should have gotten treatment, but the whole momentum of addiction and that very specific fear of looking weak kept pushing him back. His lungs slowly developed holes, which made oxygen absorption harder and then harder still, until his capacity for physical effort kept shrinking. Things that once felt routine, like walking or climbing stairs, or even just standing in crowded rooms, started to feel suffocating, like his body was disagreeing with him. Johnny, still a pro at control in public, ended up in this constant back and forth with his own system, and the frustration just kept building up. Over time, his ability to work fell off noticeably. Where he used to dazzle everyone with quick wit and offhanded humor, he began to struggle to breathe. Sometimes he would be mid-joke, and then you could hear that gasping pause right between the punchlines. In 1991, medical professionals diagnosed him with emphysema, a chronic progressive lung disease tied mostly to smoking. That diagnosis made the picture finally click. It explained the breathlessness and the physical exhaustion that had started to become impossible to dismiss. For Johnny, it was a crushing kind of confirmation that years of smoking had already changed him, and that damage wasn't something he could undo. It altered his career path and his personal outlook in ways that would keep echoing long after the words were spoken. This diagnosis also kind of explains his unexpected retirement in 1992. While fans and colleagues really thought he would keep going for more years with Johnny's wit on The Tonight Show, the truth was he was slipping away before his body could turn on him publicly. The dread of being watched, like actually watched, struggling for breath between punchlines, was unbearable. So retirement became this self-preservation thing, but also a matter of dignity or some kind of last boundary. It was a retreat from a world where he no longer felt like he could steer the story, even if people insisted the narrative was still his. After retirement, Johnny's health declined fast. By 1993, even short walks left him breathless, which meant frequent pauses, recover, then try again. His lung capacity dropped further each year, and by 2004 it was roughly 35 to 40%. That is what's often said. At that point, most people need supplemental oxygen to keep functioning. Yet Johnny reportedly refused that kind of treatment. That refusal, it suggests a complicated relationship with vulnerability, shaped by decades of pride and also old trauma that never really stopped. Life's losses, health battles, and the scars of his past made his retreat from the world not just a choice, but an inevitable necessity. Tragedies and losses in later life. Johnny Carson's life was tragically marked by profound personal losses that deepened the isolation he increasingly embraced. Among the most wrenching were the deaths of two of his sons, events that shattered the family bonds Johnny had long struggled to maintain. In 1991, Rick Carson died in a car accident on a narrow California road, a sudden and devastating blow that left Johnny grappling with grief and guilt over their estranged relationship. Rick's death unsettled Johnny deeply, compounding lifelong regrets about emotional distance. For weeks, he mourned in private, never fully recovering from the loss. The tragedy was more than just sorrow. It was a painful reflection of the fractured connections at the heart of Johnny's family life. 4 years later, heartbreak struck again when Christopher, his eldest son, died from lung cancer at the age of 45. Like his father, Christopher was a heavy smoker, a habit that likely contributed to his illness. Johnny faced the cruel reality of watching the consequences of behaviors he had modeled take the life of his own child. The weight of this loss was immense and probably intensified his feelings of despair. These deaths starkly highlighted the gaps Johnny had left wide in his familial relationships. Estranged from his sons, he rarely communicated with his surviving child, embedding a pattern of distance and silence that defined much of his adult life. The fame and fortune that elevated Johnny never filled the void of connection with his family. The cumulative effect of these tragedies deepened Johnny's withdrawal from both family and the public. Loss and regret steered him further into solitude, creating a fortress around his remaining vulnerabilities. The pain shaped the late years he lived behind closed doors, away from the eyes of the world that once adored him. This profound solitude, born from loss and regret, set the stage for the final chapter of Johnny Carson's remarkable life. Final years and legacy in isolation. In his final years, Johnny Carson lived kind of far from the world that once sort of adored him. He ended up in his Malibu home and reportedly saw very few people outside his immediate household, a sharp contrast to the millions who watched him every night on The Tonight Show. His day-to-day life became quiet, private, and carefully controlled, like all the edges were softened. Phone calls were brief, visits were rare, and silence often seemed more comforting to him than conversation. His routine was simple. He read, watched the ocean, played tennis, and then spent long stretches alone. Even with his fourth wife, Alexis Maas, nearby, Johnny often preferred quiet dinners and calm spaces over any kind of social gatherings. Some people saw that as coldness. Others thought it was just his way of shielding himself after a lifetime of emotional distance. Still, Carson wasn't completely without warmth. He gave millions to charitable causes, quietly, often without trying to get credit. That kind of hidden generosity suggested a softer side he rarely let out in personal relationships. But his isolation also carried an emotional weight. His failed marriages, strained family ties, and private grief left a sadness behind, the polished image people remember. Maybe his childhood had a lot to do with it. It was shaped by a demanding and emotionally distant mother, and that may have helped form his guarded nature. On television, he could control the room. In real life, closeness was harder, less steady, and more unpredictable. Then emphysema weakened him, and his world got smaller too. When he died in 2005 at age 79, there was no public memorial, which fit a man who protected his privacy until the end. Johnny Carson left behind laughter, mystery, and the reminder that even the brightest stars can end up living deeply lonely lives. Johnny Carson's journey reminds us that fame cannot replace true intimacy and healing. Behind the laughter was a man wrestling with pain, loss, and deep solitude. If you found this story compelling, please like this video and subscribe for more insights into the lives behind the spotlight.